Is there a formula for groovy, glitchy percussion, deep, hard-hitting bass lines, and arrangements that feel effortlessly professional? In this video, we're going to be making a minimal deep tech song inspired by Rossi's song, Don't Touch That Dial. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of music production. What you're listening to is the finished song we'll be breaking down today. And I'm going to show you how this Ableton project file was made, layer by layer, in the original order I followed, so you can easily follow along yourself. This tune only took me about 6 hours to finish, completely arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to be used in DJ sets and sent out to record labels. After having produced music for over 15 years, this is easily the fastest and best way I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. The thing is, most artists make finishing songs harder than it needs to be, because they lose motivation and direction along the way. But the good news is, there's a simple way to start new songs with confidence, knowing you'll stay motivated and focused from start to finish. Before you even start producing, choose a reference track and a main hook. Use your reference track so that your layers, structure, and mixing are inspired by a professional example, and use a main hook from the beginning to push you to make production decisions in service of that main hook, and to prevent you from straight up copying your reference. So the reference track for this one is obviously Rossi's Don't Touch That Dial. I chose this one because I've been a fan of his for quite a few years now. There's this video of a live set that he played at this cool forest festival that I found a while back, and played so many cool songs, and I found this sound and style so interesting and new at the time. So I've been following him for a little while. This song in particular is really cool. And then also, like, the minimal house style in particular, I think it's really useful to study and learn some tricks in this style, particularly because there's this cool, like, method of how there's, like, percussive elements that are somewhat percussive, but also, like, very ear candy. And then there's these melodic, like, dub echoes and interesting uses of samples and effects on the samples, chord stabs and stuff like that, where they're echoing and doing interesting ear candy stuff also. So it's a nice way to learn a bunch of techniques that you can, like, apply subtly into any genre to kind of make it a bit more minimal and give it that kind of more modern, interesting sound. So there's a lot of cool tricks that we're going to be going over there for sure. And then for the remix track, I was scrolling through Instagram and I found this clip.
My jungle love, yeah.
And I love this scene, and I used to really be a big fan of Jay and Silent Bob when I was a kid, so I figured I'd take a crack at combining these two. And one last thing is, before I jump into Ableton, what I'll also do is do a bit of research on the music theory of the tracks I'm about to work on, so I can kind of remove any guesswork when we're about to move into things. So the reference track is in A minor. Rossi's song is in A minor with a BPM of 132, and that remix hook is G sharp minor with a BPM of 120. So the nice thing here is that they're both in minor keys, and the difference is one semitone. So I'm gonna have to pitch up the vocal by one semitone or pitch down the reference by one semitone. So nothing too crazy there. They're both in minor keys. That's super helpful. And the BPM, there's a bit of a jump. This is gonna be sped up a bit, but I think we'll be able to make it work. So next we'll actually jump into Ableton. Before we do that, should also mention, I make one of these little project file pages for all of the projects that I make. There's like tutorials for all the individual little techniques so you can dive into it. And so if you want to grab this, you'll also get free access to this when you join the toolkit. And if you join the membership, you're actually going to be able to download project files and all that stuff, of course. With that said, let's jump into Ableton now. All right, so this is a look at the Ableton project file for this one. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to start over here because I want to show you what it looked like when I was actually getting started. So the very first thing that I do is I'll drop in the reference track, like the MP3 or WAV file. So I drop that in right here, and then I'll build an arrangement track. And basically what this is just empty MIDI clips to show me the different sections of the song. Then once this is set up, what I'll then do is also add the hook into it. So the remix track, in this instance, the Times Jungle Love. And now that these two things are in here, what I can do is pitch them up and down and find sections of the song. Maybe like you can see here, I found this area of the Rossi song where there was no vocals or anything like that. And that way I can kind of set up a loop here and play around with the hook, pitching it up and down and seeing if it actually does fit correctly with the reference. This also gives me the opportunity to time stretch the hook as well, so that when I do some AI separating and pull out the vocal, it's going to be easier to work with. So speaking of AI separating, that's actually the next step that I'll do is, so what I'll do is find a loop of the section of the reference that I want to work on. So in this instance, there's kind of two options. You can either pick a section where maybe a bigger drop, where there's more information, more layers that you can work on, or you might want to pick a section where there's less layers so you can more focus on those elements like one at a time and hear them a little bit closer. In this instance, I went ahead and just went for this kind of intro sub area, mostly trying to get the drums here. And so that's what I separated. I used an AI tool called Nuo Stems. And what I did is basically just separated out a drum loop, which ended up sounding a little bit like this. And so that's just the drum loop from Rossi's Don't Touch That Dial, nicely separated. And then what I'll do is then isolate out one of the kicks. So what I like to do is, if you can find a kick to slice from the reference track, either in the intro or the outro, it's kind of nicer than grabbing like an AI separated kick. I think it's just a little bit higher quality and just feels a little bit safer to do. But sometimes in the intro or outro, the artist might cut out some of the lows as kind of an arrangement trick. So if you're doing that, just keep an ear out to make sure it is a full bodied kick. And then if it's not, you can grab the perfectly isolated kick from the AI. In this instance, I was able to actually grab it from the intro. There's a couple of ways then what you can do to make that sliced kick more higher quality, because there's probably going to be like a hi-hat or something annoying in that kick as well. So what you can do is I have a rack called the V extractor where you drop it in and you can adjust the filter envelope with one knob to kind of isolate the kick out a little bit. And then also one thing that you can do as well is, like, say if I slice this kick here, you can right click on it and say show similar files, and Ableton 12 will show you a bunch of similar sounding files in your library. So that could be another good way, but the way that I've been liking the most lately is a little thing called it's called Drum Clone. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So basically I think it's resynthesis. So you drop in the kick, and then this cool ass program, which is in beta, so it's not fully out yet or anything like that, but it'll use resynthesis using sine waves and all that to reproduce the same sound and isolate the kick. So let me show you what that sounds like. So first, the input. So this is the slice that I grabbed from Rossi's Don't Touch That Dial. So if you can hear, it's messy. There's all this clicky crap on the top. Then the output sounds like this. So nicely isolated, which is really cool. Really super useful trick there. Then what I'll do is make sure that the pattern is actually playing correctly. And so in this instance, it's just 4 on the floor. So it started off with this layer here, and I added an additional top layer to kind of get a little closer to the sound that I wanted. And I've set up my template so that these like notes are already in place, the 4 on the floor pattern. Because like 80 or 90% of tunes are just going to have that pattern anyway, so it just saves you a little bit of time. And then it's also a good jumping off point. In this instance, I didn't have to make any changes, so it saved me quite a bit of time. So we just have the classic 4 on the 4 kick pattern. In terms of the sound design, went for that drum clone and then dropped that into like a drum sampler device, so I have a little bit more control. I wanted to pitch it down one semitone. That's something that I find the drum clone, I usually need to pitch it down a semitone for whatever reason. On its own, it sounds like this. So nice and solid. And then I layered on this sound. Very subtle, kind of like more top-ish end kind of sound. And I found this by you doing this similar sound functionality. And then on this one, just removing this additional little kick layer. On the drum sampler, I turned on the filter and set up this low pass. So I'm just removing a whole ton of the subby low end from 190 hertz and lower. Any other processing, very subtle stuff here. I've been experimenting with a snapback, so it's adding a little bit of click to the top end, and then a little bit of shelving, just removing some of the high end. So it's really subtle stuff here. The main trick, after you get the pattern and then the sound selection, is to just flick back and forth between your reference while it's playing, and solo it, and then unsolo it and have it turned off. So you're just flicking back and forth between the reference and what you're working on and trying to get the volumes to be accurate. You've already got the pattern, you've already got the sound, and now if you can get the volume, that's really going to get you that 80% mark. And some of the other processing can kind of push it over the edge a little bit, but really the main focus is going to be that volume. So at this point, we have a nicely isolated kick. And then for the rest of the drums, to save time, what I like to do at this phase, because we're still kind of exploring and discovering, is head back over to the stem separated drums. And then what I like to do is apply an EQ8 and have it so we're cutting off 200 hertz. So essentially this is cutting out the majority of the kick frequencies. Obviously there's still going to be some cutting through, but the majority of the kick is gone. And we've effectively turned this AI drums from the ROSSI song into a top loop that we can use. And so altogether that sounds like this. And so the idea now is we really want to focus on the low end, like the kick and the sub first. It's so important to dance music. And then what we do want to do is then move into the more melodic elements, because you can start working on the drums. That's like a traditional way to work on things. The problem that you might face, and that I've faced so many times, is like spending all this time working on the drums, then getting to the melodic stuff. And melodic stuff is where so much more can go wrong. And you might find like your idea doesn't work and it's not actually as cool as you thought, or it's clashing, it's not working, right? And so this lowers it, like that possibility, because you can start working on that melodic stuff first, find out that it doesn't work, and then stop. Or if it does work, now you have the green light to move ahead on the drums. And throughout the whole process, since you have this nice top loop, it's giving you a good understanding of the drums, and you can work in context knowing what the drums are roughly going to sound like. So I hope that makes a lot of sense here, because now we basically have a solid foundation to continue on to the next phase. At this point, what I like to do is work on the bass. So now when it comes to the bass, what I like to do is follow kind of the 3-step referencing 80-20 layering kind of process, which is first work on the pattern, then work on the sound selection, and then work on the volume, which is really similar to what I was just showing you as well. So when it comes to the bass, what I like to do to start is with Nuo stems. One of the reasons I like it is it's not a monthly fee, but also it'll automatically separate the drums and the bass and the vocals and everything for that one instance of processing AI. So then what I end up having is this like isolated bass, and this is going to come in handy for 2 reasons. The first reason is when you have like a nice MIDI clip like this, you can just drag this in, or when you have a nice audio clip like this, you can drag this into an empty MIDI clip, and Ableton will have an audio to MIDI functionality, which will listen to the audio and try to give you what the notes are. And this basically can give you a nice jumping off point to select the right notes in your tune. Then it's just a process of flicking back and forth between the reference track, flicking back and forth between what you have, and flicking back and forth between that isolated bass sample as well, and use your ear to figure out where the notes are. This is something that the more that you do it, the better you'll get at this, and then you'll also start to learn kind of fundamental bass pattern deciding. When you're making your own bass lines, you'll kind of know some interesting places to place some notes. So in this instance, I did already adapt this to the hook. Usually what I'll do is to try to do like a super carbon copy first. Unfortunately, I didn't save that mini clip. I'll try to do that in the future. So what you're listening to is the adapted version. And essentially the cool thing with this bass line is you can see there's these extra little notes here that are happening every once in a while, like little almost like if it's played by an actual bassist. And it's just kind of pedaling around the same kind of area, and then it has this little like fill at the end of every 2 bars, just a little fill basically that happens. So let's go ahead and have a listen to that. This is just the sub, because I always start with just the sub when I'm building up the bass. So this is what that sounds like. Dragon. And soloed. And so, yeah, it's a cool minimal house kind of busy but not bass line. And get the hell out of here. Okay, and then so So yeah, the pattern is good now, and then the sound is just a basic sub. I like to start with the sub first because that way we're gonna make sure that we're getting the taking care of the low end really, really, really nicely, and then we're gonna have additional layers for that extra sound design and character. And then also when you're working on a sub, it's just a super basic bass frequency, so you can really hear the notes a little bit more. Focus on getting that correctly first. In terms of the sound design, I'm using a V sub, which is something that I've created. It's just an operator doing a sine wave, and then start layering in additional amounts of distortion or saturation to taste, and you're kind of filling out that low mid bass area, so the sub is going to cut through a bit more on speakers. It's going to add a lot of grit and like character to your bass sound as well, and then also it's going to help kind of blend in a bit more with the mid bass, so there's no separation in that lower mid area. If you want a little bit of some technical information on why I like to do that, and then there's some one knob sidechain, so I have it set up with an LFO, or rather a shaper device in Max for Live, so it's just pumping to quarter notes, so I don't have to actually do any routing with any compressors or anything like that. And then let's kind of a look at the sub. Then once I have that, I'll push it a little bit further by and also I should say actually for the sub, flicking back and forth, really listening to the references low end and trying to dial in the volume to that accordingly, really focusing on the sub. You're going to be hearing mid bass and top end layers as well, and you want to kind of really focus on the sub layer. So the next layer that I add in is this bass guitar layer, so let's have a look and listen to that together. And then the bass guitar by itself. So you can hear that's a lot more of the character and all that is kind of coming in. What I'm doing here is I'm routing in the MIDI from the sub track into this guitar layer, so I don't have to duplicate things over. And then I have a MIDI pitch device, so I still have control over what pitch that note is playing. And I'll go a little bit more. I have some tutorials that I can share with you that go over this. To get into a minute, just want to kind of get through this section first. For the sound design, what I did here is over here you can see I sliced out a piece of the bass of the reference bass from like the Rossi song, and then if you right click it, like I mentioned, show similar files. Ableton will also show you any like all sorts of like instrument sounds too. So there's a bunch of different bass sounds here. You might need to throw it into a sampler and change like which pitch it's recognizing as the bass pitch. But in this instance, we're just using this synth bass Juno chorus, so kind of like a synthy analog kind of thing going on here. And that's how I found the sound design. I didn't have to actually mess with any synths. I don't like doing that kind of stuff. I like doing weirder, craftier ways like this. And then with a mid-bass layer, you're going to usually want to pull out everything under around 200 hertz or so. So you're leaving that, not creating any mud, and making space for the actual sub to take care of this area. And the in-between areas are getting filled in with that saturation that we were adding. In this instance, I'm also adding in this auto filter and having it kind of move with an LFO that's built into it. And that's how it's doing that kind of like acidy, pitchy sound, because it's moving the filter with a resonance a bit higher. And that's, as it's slowly moving, it's creating interest throughout the track, and then also producing that kind of moving acidy sound. I don't know if that's really in Rossi's song as much. This is a little bit more of starting to take it in my direction, and that's what I would encourage you do as well. When you start getting like interesting, weird little ideas, maybe it's not exactly like the original, but it's, you know, keeping the same spirit. Definitely explore that. Like, yeah, finishing this with something that's a little bit more interesting that you could actually use instead of just a carbon copy experiment is, I think, really important. And then I'm using the standard channel strip, which I'll talk to about in a bit more. But in this instance, what we're just using is this one knob sidechain, which is similar to the one that's built into my sub device. And then using this one knob width plugin. So this is the free Polyverse wider plugin. I've just mapped the core knob to this, so I can just with one knob quickly add width to this. So we're just trying to make that mid bass layer a bit wider. And then for whatever reason, I guess fun, I have this auto pan on here, and it's kind of moving the bass sound for a little bit from to the left and right. Because again, we can get more funky with that mid bass layer, because the lows, the subs, and like kind of that low mid bass is all like the majority of the sound, the beef of this is coming from this sub. Like if we listen to this and then turn off the sub, it's almost just like a little synth is playing or something, right? So like the body of the bass is like most of it's coming from this. So with that said, at this point, what I'll usually do is I'll separate out the vocal and like the vocal from the remix. So in this instance, I use that same tool, Nuo Stems, to separate out the time jungle of. Actually, in this instance, I found that Neostems, I didn't like how it sounded, so I chucked this into lol.ai. And then I liked a bit more of how it treated the vocals. So this is just a good story example to keep in mind. It can be useful to have multiple of these different AI tools. Sometimes it just depends on like the reference material and how it's going to adapt it, right? So having options is good. What I'd probably say with that caveat is like none of the ones that I have are monthly subscriptions. So I have a bunch of minutes with Lala, and the Nuostems is like $30 for like unlimited use forever. So you don't want to have like 14 monthly subscription AI things is basically what I'm trying to advise here. But the idea is chuck it into Nuostems or whatever you want to do, get the vocal isolated, and then place that in your loop. And so now what we have is the drum loop and the sub. And what I would then do is adjust the bass notes here to more bounce against the hook that we have. So you're going to take, like, especially if you've carbon copied this against the reference, this is a great way to start putting your own creativity and having it kind of support the new hook. And that's going to push it into a new and more unique and interesting direction in terms of what your bass line is actually playing. So let's have like a quick listen to the vocal here. What I did in this instance is there's kind of the main vocal of the dude singing and then like the chanted reply. I separated those out because I just wanted a little bit of more control and to kind of process them a little bit differently. I don't usually do something like that, but that's what I did here. And so let's hear how that sounds like all together. So as you can hear, it sounds pretty good. In terms of any processing on the vocal, I'm using an auto shift here, mainly to play, like I pitched down the formant here. So it's kind of making the vocal sound a little bit more weirder and lower kind of thing. It's more of like a sound design trick. I threw on an RC20, using this to kind of add like a little bit more like radio-y sound kind of thing. Same thing with this vocal cranked roar preset, removing a bunch of the lows, covering out a bit of the highs, a bit of sidechain so it's pumping, a bit of width so it's pushed to the left and right. Really subtle stuff. And then the chant, I think, is doing a slightly like less intense version of any of that. So the formant's just barely dialed down, removing some lows, less sidechain, I think, maybe similar width, but nothing too crazy. And then I think on the actual track here, I did not pitch. Okay, so I guess that this is what I did here. I did not pitch the vocal up or down. Instead, I changed what notes the bass line is playing. So this one, like the kind of progression that it's pedaling on, is different than what's in the Rossi song. So that's a change there. Basically change this bass line so it's in key with the remix, so I don't have to pitch up and down the remix essentially. Yeah, and so you can see at this point here, everything that I've showed you inside of Ableton, as well as the previous step, which was kind of that little bit of research, this is what I get completed in about an hour. And I like to work this on Fridays because there's new music coming out, so it can give you more options for stuff you might want to remix. And it's just kind of a fun day to start new songs, I find, because then you can also kind of get more exploratory over the weekend. And I don't know, it's a fun thing to do on Fridays. And so as you can see here, after like an hour of this work and playing this loop, this gives me some pretty good confidence that like I can, because with the bass is working well with the vocal, like the melodic information is pretty close and tight. That means I have some confidence that I can develop this more melodically, add more layers, and it should sound good. And like with the drums, basically using the AI stems as a top loop, I can hear that when I actually replace those drums and kind of make them my own, that it's going to be somewhat in that same vibe, and this is going to work. So this just gives a lot of confidence for producing and moving forward, and we've got a lot more to get through, so hopefully you're ready, because this is an ultimate guide. And I want to say before we move on to the next phase, usually I'll like take a break and then maybe come back to this after a few days. There's a couple of extra tutorials that you might want to see. So how to use reference tracks correctly. This is going to show you how to drop the references and the hooks and create those arrangement markers and all that I was showing you. That'll show you how to do that. And also this one here is how my template's set up. So this will show you a little bit of how to like set up like the drums and the MIDI clips so that they already have the patterns that it's most likely to be. For example, the kick being on 4 on the floor. This is how I steal the kick samples. She's going to show you a lot of cool tricks there for isolating out the kick. And then this is the bass grouping system that I was just talking about in the bass, how there's the sub and the mid bass and how you don't need multiple MIDI clips for them all to work. This shows how that works and a little bit more of why it works and all that. In addition to that, if you don't have access to these project file pages, which again you get for free if you join the toolkit, this will all be in a link in the description under the 80/20 music production course. It's a playlist of all these videos on YouTube. So if you just want to stay on YouTube, that's totally fine. All right, so now back into Ableton, what I'll do next is work on the melodic layers. And the way that I approach any layer is always the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my overall process a little bit more in detail the first time. So definitely pay a bit more attention here. And then we're going to speed up quite a bit. So basically the idea is to flick back and forth between the reference track and what you're working on and listen to any element that's sticking out the most to you that you want to work on. Try to dial your ear into that. Then what we're going to do is find the pattern for that, then the sound, and then dial in the volume for it. And then move on and move on and move on. And for each time I'm mixing as I go. There's a channel strip that I'm going to show you that I use. And I'm going to explain the process a little bit more, the first layer that we go through, and then continue on. Another thing is what I do when I'm working on this is I have the vocal on for the majority of the entire time. This way I'm always adding in layers, making sure that it's in service to that main hook. But for this example, I'm going to turn that off because it kind of gets annoying having the vocal and then some copyright stuff might come up. So just keep that in mind when you actually are doing this yourself. So let's go ahead and start working through the melodic bits. So the first layer that I actually added was just trying to really get the vibe of the Rossi's track. There's like these synths that he had playing, and it's almost just kind of playing the same notes as the bass, just in a higher register, and like moving somewhere a little bit to the left, somewhere to the right, different sounds kind of poking in and out. Cool way to use the same elements so that your song is cohesive and you don't have to write all this new stuff all the time. You can kind of build upon what you've already built on, and it actually makes the song sound more cohesive. So the first layer actually sounded like this, and I've just broken it apart. Originally it was all on one track, but this is kind of the idea. And so for this, I just kind of listened back and forth, tried to get the right notes, copied over the MIDI bass so that it gave me a good starting off point. And then for any of the sound, I sliced a bit of the sound. And of like the AI separated synth part that was isolated from Nuo stems, and then use that to find similar sounds. So this first one here, we're just doing a little auto filter with like LFO and the rate at a 3/16. So it's kind of giving more of that like filtered wobby kind of sound. I'm throwing on an AA1 trigger gate. This is a free plugin. It's super cool. Kind of gets that stutter house kind of effect. And I've just dialed the mix in and out at certain points. And then right here is the standard channel strip. So I always have this set up to remove everything under 200 hertz as default. It gives me a nice play area to kind of adjust, add in more lows or take out more lows. But we're always making sure that the low end is mostly the sub and the bass and prevents any mud and makes it a lot easier and it sounds cleaner as you're mixing and all that kind of stuff. Then we have the standard channel strip. In this instance, all I'm doing is adding in some one knob sidechain, so I don't have to play with compressors and do anything weird. I can just dial in the sidechain and move on. So making room for the kick and adding a bit of that pumping kind of, how do you say, dance music kind of effect. But what I noticed here is when I worked on this, I have a couple different sounds that I found and tried to pan them around a little bit. It was sounding way too much like the original. So what I ended up doing is actually turning off everything except for this one part here. This is a doodin down. That was the only part I wanted to keep. Everything else, I decided to go in a different direction. So this is kind of like really what I was hearing the Rossi track. And then at this point, I moved into my own direction, kind of got more unique and tried to apply my own sound to it and took the principles of what he was doing with my own style. So basically, it's almost like a call and response. There's like one bass line playing, then this one other note plays, and then it's responded to with this note, this little section here. So what I like to do personally, this is just my thing. I like to cut up samples from all sorts of different sources and have them play in those areas to kind of have that call and response effect without classic MIDI notes and synth notes and stuff like that. So this is what it ended up sounding like for me. The first layer added in was this. So just the sound here. So this is what I'm using for the first part of the call. And what this is just like a little, I looked up stabs or Rhodes stabs or chord stabs. that kind of thing in Splice. And since we know like the key, I would set the key in Splice as well and just play it and kind of like sample through everything in Splice, trying to find something that sounds cool to me that sticks out, then throw it in here, cut it up. In terms of the pattern, you can see it's kind of just doing it on the 1. So it's the call section of this. In terms of any processing, a little auto pan, so it's kind of moving around a little bit. Standard channel shift up, making room for the low end. A little sidechain, so it's pumping. A little bit of saturation, so it kind of pumps out of the mix more and has a little character. And something that I really love, is this crystallizer effect here. And so what this is adding like this weird grainy, interesting sound design kind of delay. And this kind of comes in and out. I mix it in and out throughout the track, so it's more of an arrangement thing and keeps things interesting and evolving over time. The next element that I added in was this. So, and then let's just play those two by themselves so you can kind of hear the call and response. So it's like call, response, call, response. So you can see how it's playing against each other, and it's kind of has the same vibe of the ROSSI thing, where instead of synths, we're playing with little chord stabs and stuff like that. In terms of this one, any processing, removing some lows, a little bit of the highs to kind of tuck it in a bit more, some one knob side chain. Then the next element that I added in was this sound. So you can see it's like playing off the first initial call. So the first hit plays, and then there's this additional weird little sound. And so I'll solo it so you can kind of hear it. You can hear that, right? It's subtle, right? And then over here. So with the minimal sound, I feel like it's all about like these interesting small little pieces kind of bouncing around the stereo field, playing off of each other. There's small minimal sounds that slowly build up to create something very interesting all together. So let's keep moving through that. What I added next was this little bit to reinforce this part of the response. It's that big like organ kind of sound. And I'll solo it. And so this was something I was kind of hearing, like a more sustained sound in the ROSSI song. And I think it's just kind of cool. It adds a lot of interesting character. Then I added this additional little kind of, it's actually kind of a response to this sound if you hear it. Sorry, that's the beginning part. And I solo it so you know what you're listening for. And now at this point, let's hear how that's all interacting together. This is all the melodic stuff on its own. So kind of listen to how all those elements are bouncing off of each other. There's no one sound playing the whole time. They're working together, calling and responding. You can hear that? Like I loved this. Like this cool little whatever the hell's going on. I thought it was so cool. I was really excited about the direction that this was going in. Some of the additional processing here, you can see I chuck a crystallizer on every once in a while. That's that like echoey crystally thing that you can hear in between some of the stabs there. Over here, what are we doing? Again, crystallizer, just dialed in really subtly. I love how it sounds. It's so interesting and unique. Again, you can see all the time we're moving some of the lows, a bit of that A1 trigger gate, so it's like that stuttery, trancy, slight thing that happens quite a lot, I feel like, in this minimal stuff. Really cool stuff here. A little side chain, so it's pumping some width, so it's that polyverse wider plugin, pushing that to the left and right a bit more, leaving space in the middle, a little bit of saturation, so it's coming out a bit more, adding a bit of texture. So there's this next layer over here. Weird little glitchy stuff. It's almost more of a drum track. So this is subtle stuff. And what we're doing here is there's a percussion audio track, so it's like drums and stuff like that. And if you chuck a vocoder on it and set the carrier to external, what you can do is have the you can have the melodic notes of a different sound be coming through the drum sounds in a sense. And so what I like to do is just have the audio coming from the bass guitar. It's a solid sound that's coming to, like playing throughout the whole track. And you can just play with the vocoder stuff here. This is like a pretty common minimal house trick to add that kind of like weird percussive subtle, interesting kind of sound. The next thing that I added in was this layer over here. Oh, this is more of an arrangement trick, so samurai this out. And then the next thing that I added in was this weird kind of vocal that I cut up a bit. So sick. Together. So it's just like a little cut up vocal from a sample using A1 trigger gate so that it's kind of doing that cool stuttery effect, cutting out a bunch of the lows and the highs, and the highs are getting pulled out sometimes throughout the track to kind of have it come in and out of the loop essentially at different points. So it's just interesting and evolving. Little auto pan, so it's moving left and right. And then one upside chain, so it's pumping. Width, so it's pushing to the left and right. And I'm dialing back the sustain here. So this is a transient shaper. It's the free kilohertz transient shaper device. So you have a control over the attack of a transient, the initial attack, and then the sustain, so the tail. So something that I'll often do is dial back the sustain. So each hit isn't playing out as long. It's tightening it up. And that's like, I feel like a really, really important thing when it comes to a pro sound. Things are tighter, not loose, and as if they're not meant to be together. They're tight and all working together. So that's kind of a good look at the instrumental, the melodic parts of this. So as you can see here, the idea here was it all ended up like this. We'll play it a bit with the vocal. And the idea here is to kind of like overproduce almost. You might want to overproduce, like add more layers than you need. And this is going to come really in handy when then you end up actually arranging the track because you have all these different layers to work with and you don't have to add new things in. We're going to get into that in a moment. But at this phase, I'm like, this was maybe, another hour or so I've worked on this, and then I'll quickly get the drums. The drums for me only takes about like 30 minutes or so. And what I'll do is like, okay, this gives me a really solid understanding that the vocal and the melodic stuff is working nicely. I like how this loop is sounding. I feel confident that I can now work on the drums and isolate out the drums, get that sounding good, and then actually flesh this out to really quickly into a full arrangement. So what I'll do next is go over the drums. So what I'm going to do is find a better section for us to go over. Maybe something like over here might be good. So let's let a loop up over here. We're going to turn off the AI stemmed out drums, and I'm going to actually show you one by one how I built out the drum layers. So again, same idea. What we're doing is following that principle of first picking the sound that's the most important, then figuring out the pattern, then choosing the sound, and then dialing in the volume. So for me, the first thing that I was definitely hearing in this loop was the open hi-hat. So I feel like the open hi-hat's so important to any kind of drum sound. So I usually try to like get that first, maybe sometimes the claps or the snares. But in this instance, it was the open hi-hat. So let me show you and have you listen to what that ended up sounding like. Okay, so I know this is probably overwhelming. There's quite a bit going on here. A lot of it is mostly layers. So for the most part, I want you to look at just maybe like this that I'm highlighting right here. The template I have will usually start off with just one of these. So it's that like offbeat classic position for an open hi-hat sound. What I noticed is that this is like such a cool open hi-hat sound, I think, actually. So it's like the open hi-hat, it doesn't ring out quite a bit, but it does ring out a little bit. And it's mostly, I would say, a very tight open hi-hat. In addition to that, I've been noticing this a lot in like a lot of the stuff I've been doing lately. So definitely keep this like in the back of your head. I'm noticing like there's like the classic like open hat, and then there's these little like additional accent notes as if it was like opening up even more in certain areas. So let me play it for you, and I want you to listen to something. So it's like, if you can hear that like extra little bit, like try again to listen to it if you can. So hopefully you can hear that. It's really complicated MIDI. You're probably going to want to like jump into this one to actually check this out. But essentially for the sound design, what I did is I actually extracted out the open hi-hat from the reference, and I've nestled that in a little bit. Then also did a similar sound to find a couple of extra ones to reinforce it. And then also I just have some of my own hi-hat sounds in here as well. There's a couple of weird things I want to show you actually. So for like that extra like I did some pretty interesting stuff. So if we listen to just this on its own, you hear that? So it's kind of like rattling and extending the sound a little bit. Very cool minimal sound that I feel like you might add in like the ear candy stage, but I found a cool way to incorporate it here. Basically, it's playing with this new drum sampler thing. The FX was set to loop, and you can find a little loop so it plays the initial hit and then also like kind of skitters it extra here. There's a couple of things I play with here that were actually kind of cool. This one is using an FM sound. So just reinforcing it with a little bit of weird FM stuff. And there was one other one that I thought was really cool. Was it this one? Maybe not that one. This one, maybe with the pitch envelope. If you can hear it, it starts higher and then pitches down. So there's a cool little pitch envelope thing built right into this one. I'm also doing it on this sound here. You can hear it more. So less on that first one, but if you listen, it's going up. So hopefully you're able to hear this stuff because it's really subtle, but it adds a lot of interesting sound designy textures to the overall beat. And basically what I've done here is they're using this pitched envelope, and I've also mapped an LFO onto the amount of it. So sometimes it sounds more like a normal open hat, and then sometimes it sounds more like it's rising up or rising down. And it's just moving really, really slowly. So it's slowly adjusting the amount. If you look at it here, that little bit of extra color coming in, it's pushing it to the right. It's modulation. So yeah, interesting stuff. Really cool. I'm going to experiment with this more. It adds like a nice little amount of interest, I think, to the drum sound. But the main thing was like layering and then that main bit and adding in that accent that I really hope that you're able to hear here. Or else definitely check out the MIDI for this one. Then we have the sound, we have the pattern figured out, and then a little bit of standard channel strip stuff. So nothing too crazy, no sidechain. We're just moving a whole ton of the low end so that we're trying to have like a nice, crispy, clear, clean, higher sounding open hat. The next thing I usually like to do is reinforce the open hat with a closed hat sound. So let's have a look and listen to that. Soloed. So you can see there's a lot of that like extra little groove coming in from here. One of the things I'll usually do to start is it'll probably look something more like this. So there's like the classic positions that I've just played around with a little bit. So it's always nice to have the closed hat, at least one closed hat playing the same kind of offbeat sound of the open hi-hat to reinforce it and allow us an arrangement trick so you can pull out the open hi-hat and still have the closed hat playing. So for whenever it's building up like the actual notes for the closed hat or any of these things, I'll usually work in like sections. So I'll start maybe with this section duplicated over and make it so there's like different hi-hat sounds playing, even though maybe it's like actually the same, some might be the same position, the pattern. It's just playing different sounds from the first section to the second section as a way to have it kind of like humanization, have it evolving over time too. It keeps things interesting. And like you can also play quite a bit with like you can see here the velocities as well to kind of keep it more human and less rigid and a lot more interesting. In terms of then the sound design, with the sound design, I usually like to have like a little rack I've set up with some of my favorite go-to closed hat sounds. So I'm not looking through like 200,000 closed hat sounds. These are usually smaller, more reinforcing sounds. So I feel like it's nice to just have your core ones figured out. And it also helps you develop a sound and an identity because you're starting to reuse sounds across project to project. Small, subtle stuff like that really does go a long way. In terms of any processing, we're dialing back the attack a little bit so that initial hit isn't hitting as hard because we want to soften it, or at least the approach that I'm going for here is I want to soften it so it's the actual attack is coming from like the open hat a bit more. It's more trying to blend in with those sounds. And we've dialed back the sustain a ton, so it's just trying to make those hi-hat sounds really, really tight and skippy. And then a little bit of low end here, removing some of the low end classic. This is the channel strip stuff that I'll do every time, kind of like see if it needs sidechain, see if it needs width, see if it needs to have the sustain brought back a bit. Those are kind of the ideas, the things that I'm thinking about when I'm moving forward with this kind of stuff. And then at that point, what I did, which is very different from what I normally do, is I started adding in some top loops. I think one of the reasons is as I was working on the melodic stuff, I found a really cool top loop that I liked, and I forgot that was actually in there as I was working on the melodic stuff, and I was like, let's build on this. So sometimes you have a process to follow, and it's good to have that because you can fall back on it when you get like lost or stuck. But also you want to let like the creative process take over and let you like let the song guide you sometimes. So in this instance, I broke from tradition. Usually I'll do this in a step in a second, but I added in this top layer here. Soloed and together. So you can hear this top is adding kind of mostly hi-hats, but a little bit of snare. And so my approach with top hats is usually to like nestle them into your core hits. So your main hits are going to be the one-shot open hat that you did. You're going to have your own one-shot claps and snares like over here, which we'll get to in a second. And the idea is the tops is more reinforcing your core hits, and it's adding, a little more character. These loops have a lot more stuff going on, humanization, some stuff that it's hard to do sometimes. And you can nestle that in and have it reinforce your stuff as opposed to just having the top loop be the main thing and you have no control over it. So some things that I like to do for the top loops, let's see if I'm doing any of that here. What we're doing is removing a whole bunch of the lows. There was something in this mid area, I think maybe the snare coming through a bit, so I brought down some of the EQ there, and then just a little bit of high shelf, removing the high end subtly to help it kind of nestle in a bit. Using some one-knob sidechain here, so it's pumping and making room for the kick. A bit of width, so it's pushing it to the left and right, making space in the middle. And a little bit of saturation in this point to kind of make it cut out a little bit and add a little bit of grit and character. The next element that I added in was this one right here, so let's have a look and listen to it. And let's solo it. So for this one, it's a full loop. We're removing a bunch of the lows so that the kick isn't coming through. And the main vibe I feel that it's really adding is a lot more interest in like the snare kind of area, but there's a little bit of hi-hats, adding some extra groove and interest to the loop as well. In terms of any processing on this, something that's a really common thing that I like to do with the top loops is set the warp algorithm to beats, set it so that it's this arrow pointing to the right, and then dial this back, and that's going to tighten up the transient, so that like tail of the sound, it's going to tighten it up, and that's a really good way to help you nestle it in with your core drum loop sounds, because it's tighter, it's not loose, and you can hear it ringing out a bunch. It's more blending in with everything. So that's a pretty common technique I like to do there. Little one-knob sidechain with standard channel swip stuff. Next is I added another drum loop here, so let's have a look and listen to that. And let's solo it. So this one is, the thought process was to try to add something a bit more of like in a hi-hat kind of area to, I don't know, like I guess like I feel like it was kind of cool and interesting, some of the closed hat stuff that I programmed in, but I feel like I was hearing a bit more interesting hi-hat stuff in the Rossi song, so I wanted to incorporate that a little bit more with a loop. We're tightening up a ton here with the little transient shaper trick that's built into the clips, as you can see. So we're tightening up that sound a whole ton, removing a whole bunch of the lows, trying to just kind of add a little bit high-end hats was the thought process here. Bunch more sidechain so it's pumping, and then dialing back the sustain even more so that it's a really tight sound. At this point, working on the claps, which is really important. So we're trying to reinforce, like have the main sound here. And soloed. So it's really trying to add a bit more of like that high-end clappy sound to the overall loop, because we actually are getting quite a bit of a snare sound from a lot of these tops. So in terms of the pattern, it's the standard like 2 and 4, 2 and 4, which is most claps and snare patterns are going to start like that. So yes, I have my template set up to, probably it was this one that started with. So that way you don't have to punch it in. And what I like to do with my claps is have it so it's like, again, same idea to the closed hats, having different sounds playing. So each time there's a slightly different clap sound playing. So it sounds like it's slowly evolving and changing over time. It's a little bit more human. In terms of the sound design, I have a little group of claps that I like to use here. And then also when you're doing like multiple claps overlapped, it can be a good idea to have some, like say this one's panned a little bit to the left, this one's panned a little bit to the left. And then I probably have some that are, actually they're all panned to the left, which is really interesting. I feel like that might have been, oh, I have one, yeah. So the main one's panned to the right, and then those additional ones, because if we had a look here, you can see this one is always playing. So this one's always panned to the right, and then this one would be left. This one would be left. This one would be left. Hopefully that makes sense. And then little K clip, just trying to reduce the dynamic range. No side chain, nothing really crazy here. Just removing some low end. Then what I usually like to do is reinforce the clap with my own snare. So the idea is, if you saw the claps, we're doing stuff to push it to the left and right in terms of the panning, and then the snare stays down the middle. So it's kind of makes a nice full sound when it comes to all this. So let's have a look and listen to the snare. Let's solo it. So you can hear here we have like the classic pattern. So this is where I started. And then to make it interesting, it's just additional hits play on the last 2 hits here. One is a little bit lower and then one's a bit higher. So again, it's just making the loop subtly more interesting. I feel like it's all about subtlety. Yeah, it goes a long way with that. Then what I added in after was this additional little top loop. I'm gonna solo it. So you can hear there, that's like that cool, minimal, echoey, percussive kind of thing. What I find, this is like such a trick to do the minimal kind of glitchy drum sound so easily. If you find like a loop like this, and then you throw on this device here, it is a paid device, but it's called Tantra 2, and it has all these crazy presets that like make things sound so sick and minimal. So if I play it by itself with it off. So it already sounds cool and minimally, right? But if we add this on, so fucking cool, you know what I mean? Like, and so easy to do. Yeah, highly recommend this plugin. Get it only on sale because else it's really expensive, and when it's on sale, it's like $20. So keep an eye on that if you like this minimal stuff. Such a hack, a quick way to get the vibe. I love it. Removing some of the lows, removing some of the highs, removing the attack of it so it's not hitting as hard. We want this to not really be punching people in the face. It's a subtle, like, ear candy layer almost, right? And then we're dialing out some sustain, trying to keep it tight. Again, like, nestle it into everything. It's adding subtle texture and interest to the sound. With this minimal stuff, it's all about small stuff adding up over time. A little bit sidechain, so it's pumping a little bit width, so it's left and right. And then one thing that I was hearing that I think I just missed off the top was like there's really fast hi-hats kind of playing, I feel like. I solo it. So I feel like I didn't really get that when I was programming it in, so I wanted to add that in. In terms of any processing, removing some low end, removing some of the attacks so it's not hitting so hard, kind of same stuff, set side chain, sustain. Main thing with all these is just quickly moving through the channel strip like this and then listening back and forth to the reference and trying to get the volume. The volume is going to get you so far the way. I really want to stress that. Even though I'm talking about the little tricks that I'm doing from time to time, this is almost like workflow. Always go through, remove some low, and then the main thing is the volume. So at this point, what we have is a pretty sick sounding fucking like full beat. Oh, and the kick was gone that whole freaking time. Sorry. I really like it. That's crazy. Sorry I didn't have the kick on the whole time. Normally I would have the kick on as I'm building it. You want to know how everything's interacting with each other, but hopefully you can hear everything nicely in isolation. What I would do next is maybe build it out a little bit longer. One thing that I did do is I added this little echo from the vocal and then reversed it also. So I just resampled an echo off of the vocal and then had it like used as like a pad layer. That's also something pretty cool that we added in there. But okay, so at this point we have this full loop, right? At this point it wouldn't look like this. It would look more like kind of this. And the idea here is what I'd like to do is really show you how I would arrange this incredibly fast. So the idea here is like, say this was the loop that we have. Okay, we've built out the loop. And what I'd essentially recommend is you treat all these elements as puzzle pieces. So you can see all the yellow stuff is the drums. Right here, this weird colored stuff is the vocals. And this blue stuff is the melodic bits. And this red stuff is the bass. So one of the simplest, fastest way to get an arrangement done is to just treat this as puzzle pieces and follow the arrangement markers that you've made blindly at first. So intro, it would look something like this, right? Let's drop in the kick. And let's grab all this. boom, boom. So now that's the drum intro. At this point, it's the same thing, right? So let's duplicate it over, keep the bass in here. And maybe, I guess we could have the, like this melodic stuff in here too. Boom. Let's have the vocal not here. Maybe the vocal comes in at the drop. And now we can just go like this, copy everything over. At the break, just start by zeroing out the kick. It's like the simplest way. Duplicate everything over. Boom, boom, boom. Now we have a drop. So let's go back to that first drop that we had. Let's make it so the vocal comes in the first two. And we'll go like this. Just grab this entire section. Boom. Then we have the break down. So let's duplicate everything over again. On the break down, on the build down, there's usually no vocal, but we'll come back to this. Just remove everything like that. On the break, it's usually the same thing without the kick. And then we have a drop and a build down. So let's go down to this one here. It's 4 of these chunks. So let's grab 2 chunks here and paste it over twice. And then the build down again is usually without the vocal. So let's just go here, remove the vocal. And then the outro is usually just drums. And let's go over here, grab 1 section of the drums from the intro. Boom. So the idea here is just to treat this as like a go dry is what I've been kind of calling it, oddly enough. And this way you already have like something of an arrangement that you can now take to the next level. So what I would do at this point is then actually go through each one of these sections and work on it section at a time. So what I would do is listen to the intro, flick back and forth between Rossi's track and my track, and adjust the layers and how things are evolving from this section to this section, and build it in according to that reference, then move on to the next section, then move on to the next section, then move on to the next section. So the idea is when you first build out your loop, you want to kind of get that main area where as much of stuff as possible is going to be playing. And then it's just a purpose of like subtraction or like, basically like removing layers to get to the main layer instead of like building a crazy first drop with everything that you have, and then you're kind of feeling like, okay, on this next drop I gotta add something new, and then it's just a weird way to produce, like to constantly be thinking that you need to add new elements. It makes more sense to build with intention, get like a really solid core idea, and then set up your arrangement so everything is building towards your core idea. And if you have to add some extra layers on the way, then you have to add some extra layers on the way. But this way you're making everything with intention, serving the main hook and the main melodic stuff that you've built, and using that first and then building tension by taking things away instead. So what we end up with is a little something like this. What I'll do is I'll quickly go through kind of a bit of the arrangement that I've built out here. I'll turn on the vocals, and then I'm going to show you this last step with this effects and ear candy in a second. But the idea is first we have this intro. Something to keep in mind is usually every 8 bars there's a change. So around here, a bit more drums coming in. Over here, sub, so the bass is in. On the second half of it, starting to incorporate more of the melodic stuff. So you can see here it's slowly building, adding in more layers. We're building the energy. A little trick is to just duck out the kick before the drop. Another actually thing that's really cool, this is really common in like Rossi minimal stuff, is little fills. Think of it as like a drum fill, like, but he does it only with the kick drums like this. Do. Very, very common thing. Definitely would recommend looking into that. It's more of like an arrangement thing, but it is very important to the drums as well. Then we have the drop. Vocal, I like to have it swell in, filter in. And then after 8 bars, it's full. And then build down. I turn it into a verse. And removed some of the melodic elements, so the vocal is just coming by. It's almost like it's dropping down a little bit. Break, usually common thing, remove the kick, like I said. And then cool little, like, check out the drum fill here. Right, into the drop, again, faded in. Now it's fully fading in. Then it's fully in. Then it's playing by itself. And then something that I like to do a lot here is I've been adding a lot of echoes to the vocals. So over here, I think one thing that I've been doing that's really useful is you kind of just want one part of the vocal to echo out, right? Like that one, like thing, right? So what I've been doing is just actually having a new vocal echo track where I have the echo on here set to 100% wet, so it's not going to play uh, the original like little vocal thing. It's just going to play the echo. So this way I can just copy the piece that I want down here and control the echo completely on its own track. This way you can kind of control, especially with this stuff, where like, see how the feedback is almost at 100%? It can get unwieldy and crazy and double up and repeat on itself so the volume gets out of hand. And so this way you can control the volume with like the mix on this track, and it's a lot more flexible. It's really cool. I've been really enjoying that. But anyway, just gonna kind of rip through the rest of the arrangement here. Then we have the biggest breakdown, and then into the nice drop before it. Okay, and then we'll just quickly scrub through every 8 bars. More vocals. Something I like to do is add a ride to reinforce the energy here. Nothing too crazy, right? And then it's just building down, so now it's gonna be no vocal. Again, slowly removing more layers. We're building down the energy. And then just fucking drum outro. So yeah, this, I would say, like, building out the rest of the loop takes maybe another hour or so. This arrangement part, like, getting that first high-level arrangement takes like 15 minutes, and then it can take an extra hour or two, like, actually, like, listening through each section to section and kind of getting a bit more creative. What I'll usually do is, like, follow the references arrangement a lot more to a T at first, and then as I'm incorporating my own hook and vocal, like, this is slightly different than the... Like, if you can see here, just like this, see how long the drop is here? It's 1, 2, 3, and like a bit. In the ROSSI's arrangement, I ended up like removing that extra little bit, and you end up kind of adjusting the arrangement to fit your hook a little bit more. So I think that's a pretty good rundown of this. If we head back to the page here, this guide shows you each of those steps one by one. So this is the look at the actual structure track. Here's some of those things that, like, these will open up videos, split monitoring, transitions, and effects. Something that I do here is I also like to add in little like crashes and reverse sounds. It's all about subtly adding these in, or else it's going to sound like a cheesy EDM track. I talk about that a lot more in this video here, and also something that I've been doing a lot lately is, if I open up my browser, I've saved all my project files, and you can do the same if you have access to mine, or if even in your own library. You can just go into any of these, go into the project file, and then go in to the actual ALS file, and you can see the individual groups, and you can just drag an effects group onto there, and then use that as a starting point to get really fast. Like, that extra little bit of polish, I would say, that stops you from adding too many layers. And then the last couple steps to know that the song is finished. Three things rule. So pick 3 things that are going to have the biggest impact on the listener and make those changes. It's a way to make sure you're not like dialing in the kick forever. You're finding the last 3 things that make the most sense, doing those and moving on. 80-20 mixing, we kind of did that. We're moving as we go. And then a little bit of 5-minute mastering. Basically, what I like to do is a little bit of compression and saturation on each of these buses, basically to reduce the dynamic range, so that when we enter the mastering, which I'll make a video for at some point, it's a series of compressors, clippers, and limiters, each one just dialing in maybe a decibel or so of gain reduction, so that they're all not working too hard. And by the end of it, we're hovering around -9-ish decibels left for the club, and that gives you so much leave room for dialing that back to do a streaming release. So hopefully that all sounded good. If you want to check out the guide, you can get access to that for free. If you also join the membership, you'll be able to download this project file as well as all of the project files and extra tools and all this stuff that I've made available. And if you want to look at this specific project file in detail, seeing all like the automation and little things that I do to kind of like create tension and make an interesting arrangement, it helps a lot to just look at this stuff, really. So if you want to check that out, it's bestfriendsclub.ca/join, and there's links in the description and all that stuff. But with that said, hope you found this useful, and we'll now jump into a recap of the 80-20 rule, so you can kind of take some of the high-level ideas and start applying it to your own productions right away.
Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here, and if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song.
In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later. And check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.